Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has accepted the resignation of Northwest Director of Public Prosecutions, Advocate Moipone Noko. Now, Noko's resignation comes days after she was informed that an inquiry would be held into her fitness to hold office. The presidency says National Director of Public Prosecutions, Shamila Batoyi, requested the inquiry back in November to investigate Noko's decision to drop fraud and corruption charges against controversial Durban businessman Toshin Pandey. Now, she was head of the NPA in KwaZulu-Natal at that time. Noko also received backlash for her role in the NPA's decision to pursue racketeering charges against then KZN Hawks head Johan Booysen. For reaction, let's bring in Johan Booysen himself, who joins us now via our telephone line. Johan, thanks for your time. Welcome to the program. I imagine this move comes as some kind of vindication to you?
Good morning. No, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, in what sense do you feel that some of the stuff you had been saying are now coming into fruition? I mean, it's just a resignation at this point. Nothing, call it substantive, has been proven yet.
Well, it's not only Advocate Noko that's now resigned. Just before an inquiry was to be held to a fitness to hold office. But you would recall that during the whole commission inquiry where I testified against Advocate Moipone Noko, she'd subsequently been dismissed from her post at the NPA. Over and above that, I've also opened criminal charges against Advocates Gladstone Mahema and Advocate Noko for lying in the prosecution memorandum to procure authorization for my prosecution from the then head of the NPA, Advocate Shaun Abrams. Advocate Shaun Abrams himself and Advocate Marshall Mogatwe both had credibility findings against them when they withdrew charges against Juba. So it seems like as if the wheels of justice are moving slowly, but they are moving.
Yeah. One also hopes that, of course, a resignation doesn't mean you get to abdicate being held to account. Is that a fear you have?
Well, I believe, just like the previous provincial commissioner of KwaZulu-Natal, Moipone Noko, the day before I was to testify at her hearing, she also resigned. But the fact remains that they will still have to face criminal charges, and I will pursue those criminal charges against all those advocates.
Yeah, I mean, a long-standing concern that had been ventilated in the public domain is how the NPA is quite frankly incapacitated and is struggling to keep up with the many cases in front of it. In fact, just on Friday, we heard quite a bizarre development of Steinhoff now helping the NPA by funding an investigation into itself. Are those developments a cause for concern for you when it comes to the prospects of us getting to the bottom of the case that has you implicated involving people like Moipone Noko?
Well, the astonishing thing that I find is that there are still remnants of the previous regime of the NPA still active, undermining the good work that the current NDPP, Advocate Shamila Batoyi, is doing. I find it absolutely incomprehensible that you have the likes of Advocates Marshall Mogatwe, Advocate Anthony Mozine still defending the actions of Noko and Juba in spite of all the credibility findings by courts, by boards of inquiries, disciplinary hearings. So, when I testified at the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, I made it quite clear that as long as those remnants of the previous regime under Juba and Abrams remain within the NPA, they will remain compromised. And it's not only that institution, it's also within the Hawks. Under the regime of Burning and Lemaitre at the Hawks, the Hawks were eviscerated. And that's why we find ourselves in a situation now where other institutions have to come to the fore and assist with these prosecutions.
Interesting you say that, because I remember Shamila Batoyi, as well as other senior members of the NPA, it must have been in the middle of last year, being at pains to explain that part of the delay behind having successful prosecutions is because they're busy with a cleanup campaign within the NPA first. Your sentiment now is that not enough of that cleaning has taken place.
I would like to see that all these prosecutors that were implicated in state capture, that at least some sort of action is taken against them. I mean, when Shaun Abrams and Marshall Mogatwe withdrew the charges against and call with you. The matter was taken on review in the High Court, and a bench of 3 judges made credibility findings against Shaun Abrams, who have subsequently been removed from office by the Constitutional Court. But you're still sitting with Advocate Marshall Mogatli there. I mean, there's a credibility finding by a court, by a high court from this country, that's been made against him, and nothing has happened to him. As a matter of fact, if you read the judgment of the 3 judges, it's clear that both Mogatli and Abrams had lied under oath in court papers. I mean, that's a criminal offence of perjury, and I would like to see some action taken against the likes of Marshall Mogatli, Advocate Gladstone Mahema, who's still within the NPA, against whom I've opened criminal charges for lying in a prosecution memorandum, him and Noko. They both lied and fabricated evidence to get me prosecuted. One would expect them to be the upholders of the Constitution, but in this particular instance, they seem to have raped the Constitution.
Mm. According to you, who do you rate is dropping the ball here?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Your take on who is dropping the ball, who should be held responsible for the lack of movement, as you would put it, to hold those people to account?
Look, obviously there are processes in place that needs to be considered. So I wouldn't like to opine on that particular issue. At least I'm glad to see that there is some movement, and hopefully action will be taken against these other prosecutors in the not too distant future.
Precisely, and that's why I asked this question, because my understanding is that it's not that simple, right? There are people who face allegations, in some instances people who even courts of laws have found unfavorable findings against, but having them removed isn't just something that could be done at a stroke of a pen. At which stage would it become unreasonable for you, for those particular individuals, to continue remaining in the NPA, that considered?
Look, I'm made to understand that they are waiting for the recommendations from Deputy Judge President Zondo of the Commission of Inquiry. But I would argue that it's not necessary to wait for that. The evidence is there. The criminal cases have been opened. As far as I'm concerned, there is prima facie evidence against those prosecutors. And on a balance of probabilities, which is what is the level of proof in the disciplinary hearing, there's most definitely a case to be made against all the prosecutors that I've mentioned. So I would expect at least within the next month or so. But what I obviously do not know is we know that Noko has received a notification from the President's office that there's an inquiry against her, and that she's now acted upon that notification and resigned. I do not know whether any of the other advocates that have been mentioned in court papers or at the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, whether they have also received notification. So I wouldn't like to speculate in that regard, but I would hope that one would soon see some action taken against those prosecutors.
Many will come out to say Noko's resignation is in some respects a soft, call it level of admission, right? Leaving her office. If you were to have things your way, what would you say needs to happen next?
Well, it's evident that this is a stratagem by herself to avoid going to a hearing like Advocate Juba did. But one thing that she cannot run away from is the criminal matter, which I will most certainly pursue, no matter the fact that she had now resigned from the NPA.
Right, Johann Booysen, thanks very much for your time. Really appreciate your insights on this. Johann Booysen joining us there via our telephone line.